Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to the show today. My name is Chef Andy, your host, and today we are going to be working with some chicken. I'm going to be showing you how to pair that with some tomatoes and some peppers. And of course, just to mention, this is a particularly healthy dish in the fact that we of course have some pepper here that we're going to be incorporating into our recipe. One particular beautiful ingredient that contains a bit of lycopene, which is a beautiful antioxidant that helps in fighting heart disease. Now, before we begin, I'll of course introduce the ingredients and then we can proceed to the main event. Now, from the very front, I'm going to be using about half a stalk of leek and about 100 grams of chicken breast. I'm also going to be incorporating some sesame seeds in that. About half a lemon will be required as well, some smoked paprika, about a small handful of some fresh coriander and a whole red bell pepper. You'll also require about 3 medium-sized tomatoes, some salt and pepper to season with, and last but not least, some olive oil to cook with. But before we begin this simple journey, we're of course going to give you this chance to refresh and unwind, and we'll catch you after a short break. Welcome back, viewers. For those of you who missed out on the introduction, we're going to be working with a very simple chicken and some stewed peppers and tomatoes. And of course, before we begin, I'll of course mention to you some of the ingredients that we've used on this recipe are particularly able to be substituted. You can alternatively use cherry tomatoes for this recipe. They do carry a bit of sweetness to them. And you can of course incorporate that to the large size tomatoes, which of course also gives a nice beautiful balance to the eye. You can of course also substitute the smoked sweet paprika for any regular paprika powder that you may be able to find at your retail regular stores. And of course, last but not least, to mention the sesame seeds. We are going to just be using this to garnish. So if you don't have this available to you, you can of course work without them. I will also mention that you can also substitute the leek for some white onion, which will of course also give a nice beautiful balance of flavor. Now, to begin this very simple process, you will of course need a bowl. So begin by moving your chicken into the bowl. And very simply, we're going to begin by seasoning our chicken. So for that, we're going to be incorporating some sweet smoked paprika. As I also mentioned, you can be able to find regular paprika at your retail stores. So we're going to add about 1.5 teaspoons. Now, one particular thing I like about smoked paprika, just as the red bell pepper does, it also carries a nice beautiful touch of an antioxidant by the name of lycopene. And what happens is this particularly aids in digestion. It also aids in reducing some particular chronic heart diseases. So this is a particular important ingredient that you should actually be able to have, or you should have in your pantry. Now to that, I will of course season as well with some salt. And of course crush over some black peppercorns. And all we're going to do is dry rub our chicken, and this basically just means tossing your chicken in some marination without the incorporation of any oil. And what this does, it will do two things. First of all, it will tenderize our chicken quite a bit. It will also give it a nice beautiful aroma and a burst of red color, which you'll of course be able to see when we are heading towards the last and final part of the show, which of course you don't want to miss out on. And all you're going to do is keep tossing your chicken in your bowl, of course using your tongue to hold your breast, and of course proceed to wipe around your bowl, making sure to incorporate at least most of your paprika powder. And once that's done, we're going to allow that to sit undisturbed for just a few seconds, allowing us of course to proceed to prepare everything else. So for this, you will begin by halving or quartering 2 medium-sized tomatoes. So begin by slicing off the stem end, and you can discard. And very simply proceed to slice those into quarters. You will of course keep the seeds intact to this recipe. You may not want to discard them because you of course need that beautiful juice from the tomatoes. And of course, if you're not also a very fond fan of using seeds in your tomato mixture, you can also pretty much reduce the content of your tomatoes by just slicing through the wedges, and you can of course just proceed to use the skin and the inner flesh. Now while our pan proceeds to heat up, we're also going to proceed to clean out our pepper. So very simple technique. Begin by slicing off that bit of stem at the end, and proceed to turn your pepper around, and very simply using a sharp knife proceed to slice from the top and proceed to go right around the sides, of course working in an almost semicircle motion as you of course go around the heart of the pepper and avoid contact with any particular parts of the pepper that have any seeds to them. And you can proceed to slice that out completely, and you can of course use this for making stocks, or you can proceed to discard if you won't be using it for any of those purposes. So very simply, once that's done, we're going to proceed also to remove the inner flesh of our peppers. Of course this is always a little bitter and of course very unpleasant, so always begin by taking those out completely. And proceed to do so right up until all your wedges are completely cleaned out, and you can of course proceed to discard that as well. Right, now very simple technique I've learned over the years. If you're looking for a good burst of flavor from your tomatoes, it's actually always a very good idea to salt them. So just proceed to move those into a bowl, and of course proceed to add about a teaspoon of salt. And all you need to do at this stage is just toss those very gently, and you can allow those to sit right up until you need to cook. Right, so once that's done, we're also going to proceed to chop up a bit of our leeks. So by pressing firmly onto your board, proceed to slice through. And one particularly good addition of onions to this dish will always give a beautiful aroma. And of course it also brings about a nice beautiful citrusiness to it and a bit of juice that will of course give a beautiful balance to the heat of your peppers, or rather the heat of your black peppercorns, and of course incorporate very nicely with the salt. Now to begin, proceed to add about a tablespoon of oil to a hot pan. Move your pan around just to get a nice even spread of your oil. And once that's done, we're going to proceed to cook our chicken. Now I always advise for you to cook the skin side, which is basically the nice beautiful curved side on the outside. And you can achieve this very simply by lifting your pan very gently and just laying your chicken breast right over. And we're going to allow that to continue cooking at medium to high heat. That should take us anywhere between 4 to 6 minutes to just get a nice even color around it. But very important, because we're going to be cooking this in 2 parts, at this stage you can proceed to grab a plate And of course, this will basically aid you in allowing your meat to rest very, very briefly. You can also move your breast around your pan, of course not using your bare hands, just to avoid burning. And by moving that around, you actually incorporate a bit of flavor to the base of your pan. Of course, also using up that little bit of heat that's on the sides. And after the count of about 3 minutes, proceed to turn over. And you can reduce your heat completely and proceed to do the same. And of course, this particularly will also aid in allowing for you to grasp that bit of flavor from the pan, also incorporating any bit of oil that's dripping from your chicken. And it also aids in keeping your pan nice and clean. And of course, free from any particular excess fat that may be dripping from your chicken. And once that's done, you can proceed to lift and allow that to rest very, very briefly on the side. And now, by using the same pan, proceed to add a little bit more oil. And we're going to begin the process very, very simply by sauteing our leeks. Now proceed to toss those very, very quickly on your pan. Should take you just under a minute. And once that's done, we're going to just proceed to reduce this in size. But remember, you of course want to keep the chunks. And of course, shake off any seeds that may still be in your peppers. And you can proceed to add those to your pan. And proceed to calibrate your heat to a little higher. So you can proceed to put that at medium. While your peppers continue, proceed to add your tomatoes. And you can proceed to toss that in your pan. And you can at this stage proceed to reduce your heat completely. This will of course avoid for you to overcook or overpulsify your tomatoes. And it's a very, very simple concept. You're basically just trying to blister the sides or the skins of your tomatoes. And you should be able to see that beautiful spark of orange or yellow from the outside part of your tomatoes. So always be sure to make sure that the skin of the tomatoes actually touches the bottom of the pan first. Just very, very simply proceed to move your tomatoes around, and once you have that beautiful color, proceed to toss them over and allow for the inside to also cook through. And of course, spread out your peppers as well, making sure that each and every bit of your ingredients is actually able to touch the base of your pan. Now, a beautiful also addition to this recipe, you can also incorporate some cream if you're looking at having a nice, beautiful richness to it. You can also substitute some parsley for the coriander. It also gives a nice, beautiful sharpness. And remember, you can still also use the same ingredients to incorporate into a very, very simple salad. But remember, of course, you will, of course, cook your ingredients first, allow them to cool off very shortly. And you can be able to incorporate this and turn it as well into a very, very simple salad. By, of course, also slicing your chicken will, of course, also give it a bit of warmth. And of course, a nice, beautiful presentation. Right now, our tomatoes are now starting to break apart. So you should actually have just a bit of the juices running at the base of your pan. Proceed to toss your mixture. And all we're going to do at this stage is proceed to add our chicken. But very, very importantly, proceed to also slice it at this stage. And this is basically to make sure that your chicken is able to absorb the juices. And it also allows for you to make sure that your chicken is cooked through. Proceed to slice right up until you get to the end. And you can proceed to add your chunks of chicken into the mixture. And very, very simply proceed to toss your ingredients together. And all we're going to do at this stage is allow that to continue slow cooking, and of course keep tossing it as you do so, and allow that to continue to cook for anywhere between 5 to 6 minutes. And this should actually allow for the blending of those beautiful ingredients. It will also allow for you to get your tomatoes to break up very, very, very gently, and of course allow them to also continue to hold their shape. But before I take you to the next step, which is basically now going on to plating and of course finishing off with the ingredients before us today, I will allow you this chance to take a very short break, and we'll catch you in a very little while. Welcome back, viewers. For those of you who are just tuning in, we've basically just been cooking our chicken. We also managed to fry up our peppers and tomatoes. And this of course brings us to the last and final part of this dish. Now this finishing of this is very, very simple. As I mentioned, it is a one-pot dish. It is of course also a dish that of course does not even need any starches. You can basically eat it as it is. But of course, just before we give you the last and final part of the dish, we'll of course proceed to add some of the ingredients that we still need to incorporate. Now to that, I will begin by shredding up some coriander. And this I'm just going to slice very, very chunky. And of course, always be sure to remove the stems, because those will of course not cook any smaller in size. You can proceed to add those to your pan and toss together. And of course, just to give it that nice, beautiful burst of flavor. Of course, you may not at many cases have some ready stock, but if you do, you can also reduce some stock into this very simple mixture. And what the stock will do is basically it manages to break down your peppers quite well. It will also aid in giving a bit of nutrient value, because it is also a good alternative to adding water to any of the meals you prepare. And it will also manage to be able to wash down all that flavor that's of course on the sides of your pan. And this you can achieve very easily by rubbing your mixture against your pan and basically taking your pan round in circles. And of course allow that to settle right at the base. Be sure to also turn over your chunks of peppers and tomatoes as you continue, just to make sure to get a nice even cooking all round. And you can reduce your heat at this stage. Now next up, we're going to also infuse it with a bit of some acid, and for this reason I'm going to be using half a lemon for that purpose. And as I'd mentioned earlier in the show, if you missed out, of course, this is particularly very, very good for those of you going through particular heart diseases. And as well for some of you who are also going through some cancerous infections, or of course you're suffering from a bit of cancer. These are particularly good antioxidants. Remember, these are beautiful ingredients to be able to wash down your system with. They actually also clean down your digestive system quite well, allowing for your small and your large intestines to be able to absorb and of course break down different kinds of foods a little better. Now once that's done, very importantly, always remember to season. And for that, we're going to use just a little bit of salt. And of course, I'll also crush in some black peppercorns. And I, at this stage, will proceed to turn the heat off completely. And of course, this means we're going straight to plating. So before further ado, proceed to grab a nice big ladle. Be sure to always give your dish a bit of a mix before plating. And I'm basically going to begin by building the dish very simply by moving the chicken onto the plate first. And we're going to move those chunks right to the center of the plate. Very simple tool that you can be able to purchase at your retail stores. And remember, the tongs that you may be able to find may not actually look exactly like mine, but remember they also aid in helping you to plate and lift ingredients in your kitchen every now and then. So it is actually a very good addition to your crockery. Right, once the chicken's in, we're going to proceed to plate our peppers. So I'm just going to go in a round, orderly fashion, plating each piece almost an inch away from the other, right up until you get to the very other side. And you can now proceed to move your peppers right in between the spaces you left off. And this basically allows for you to get a beautiful symmetry while you're plating. Also gives you time to think of ideas of beautifying your plate as you go. Right, once that's done, at least the rest of the mixture is pretty much very much pureed at this stage. So you can proceed to just pat down those pieces of tomato very gently in your pan. And this will basically allow for the sauce to thicken very simply. And all you need to do now is scoop out the rest of your remaining ingredients and proceed to plate that along the sides of your plate. And of course, always have just a little bit of the liquid remaining in your pan. Just proceed to scoop that to the very end of your pan, and you can proceed to just pour that over very gently. Right, once that's done, we'll actually just grab a bit of some kitchen towel. This is basically to aid in cleaning your plate. And as I mentioned, it's a very handy tool in the kitchen. Remember, this very handy, especially if you're trying to keep clean and of course avoiding any contamination. And they also give you quite a bit of an advantage when cleaning a bit of a spill or a mess. Now, this of course brings us to the last and final part of the show, and I will of course thank you once again for tuning in this far. We of course have been working on a very simple chicken dish, as you can see. One thing that I could mention at this stage, remember this is particularly high in calories and in protein, but of course very lean on fat. And of course, due to the fact that it does not need any carbohydrates to go with it, it gives it just the right amount of balance to call it a one-pot dish. Any other serving suggestions I could add to that? You can also alternatively grab the remaining bit of your coriander leaves, and you can just bundle those up right at the top. And of course, just to give it a bit of burst of color, you can also sprinkle over some sesame seeds. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the last and final part of today's show. I do hope you've had some fun as much as I did. I will also share a few tips to this dish. Remember, this is particularly a good, healthy alternative, but you can still, of course, serve this to your family or even your kids. It also is a very quick and handy meal, especially if you're quite strapped for time and you're looking for a nice and easy dish to go along with maybe some rice or some potatoes, or even some starches that you may have left over in your refrigerator. You can of course be able to achieve this very simple dish. You can of course alternatively also use any particular chicken that you may have left over from your barbecue. It is a very particularly nice way of bringing it back to life, giving it a nice beautiful touch of a bit of a sauce, and of course last but not least, making it a little more edible for you and your family. But for this, we've come to the last and final part. I will, of course, remind you, you can always send your comments, any queries that pertain this show. We're always more than happy to hear from you. And you can manage to do so by writing to us through our Facebook page, that's BrandPlus TV Kenya. And if you, of course, missed out on this episode, and you, of course, and you've missed out on any other episodes in the past, you can also be able to recap on the recaps of these videos on our YouTube page, that's BrandPlus TV Kenya as well. But for this and more, I will bid you farewell for now. Wishing you a very splendid evening, and until the next episode, do have a lovely evening, and bye-bye.